Reality is fragile. Layers of code, history, and perception stitched together. But what happens when the seams split? When forgotten signals resurface and they become something else entirely? Welcome to Glitched Reality. Before we step into tonight's darkness, here is what's happening beyond the static. Glitched Reality has officially expanded and became Glitch Studios. We're now telling stories in more than just this way. Our weekly horror comics will be live after every episode in Season 2. For now, I'm adapting the current stories. They are live on Webtoons and Global Comics, with new chapters dropping as soon as they're done. You can dive deeper into the madness you hear as well, because there'll also be tracks for each episode on SoundCloud, so you can hear the horrors on the go even more. And if you want early access to anything from Season 2 or some behind the scenes looks, check out the Patreon in the link tree, which will be in the show notes. And if you would like any more information, please head to the Instagram Glitch Studios to find more about the entire world of Glitch Reality. Now, let's break reality. Tonight we follow a man who has poured his soul into lifeless wood, only to find puppets start talking back. This is the Puppet Maker. The workshop smelled of sawdust and old varnish. Warmth almost comforting, like a place frozen in time. Sunlight bled through the cracked windows, slicing through the cluttered room in fractured patterns of light and shadow. Piles of sketched, rough wooden limbs are scattered, tools littered everywhere over every surface. But at the heartbeat of all this chaos sat Edward Hale, master craftsman, artist, and prisoner of his own obsession. Edward's hands moved with surgical precision, guiding the chisel down the grain of oak. His latest project, a life-size puppet, lay sprawled across the workbench. Its body still incomplete, but the face was almost perfect. Carved-lipped, frozen mid-sight, eyes polished, glass spheres stuck into their sockets, staring straight through anyone who looked. He couldn't look away from those eyes. Something about them was wrong. They seemed to follow him, watching every flicker on his wrist as the curl of wood shavings. Edward wiped his forehead, his slick skin wet with sweat, and he forced to focus. It was just him imagining. He told himself, puppets don't move, they don't watch. He hears an almost inaudible whisper, "Make me real." He froze, chisel hovering above the puppet's cheek. The voice was so faint, he almost didn't hear it. Like a breath on the wind, sipping through the cracks. He glanced around, his pulse quickening, but the workshop remained still. Too still. Shaking off his unease, Edward returned to his work. He pressed harder with the chisel, guiding the curve of the jawline, but his focus was slipping. Splinters pricked his fingertips and his palms ached. A glance at his hand revealed a tiny shard embedded just beneath the skin, thin and sharp like a needle of wood. He pulled it out with a free and a hiss of pain as it dropped to the floor, where it blended seamlessly in with all the debris. The night crept in. Into Edward's room stretched shadows, long and crooked. As exhaustion gnawed at him, Edward leaned back, letting his aching shoulders rest, the puppet face staring up at him. Too human, too knowing. For just a moment, he thought he saw the corner of its mouth twitch. He saw something knotted. He could hear something, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the puppet. When he finally broke free from this puppet's gaze, his own reflection in the dusty workshop mirror caught his attention. Hollow eyes now stared back, dark circles pooling like bruises. He looked older, more worn down. Was it the strain of his craft, or something else entirely? He hears a faint sound of whisperings, just again. He shook his head and reached for the lantern to snuff the flame out. But his hands seized up, fingers rigid and aching. Gritting his teeth, he flexed his hand until the stiffness faded. Just too much work, he reasoned. Too many hours hunched over the bench. He needs his sleep. As the light dwindled, The puppet remained on the workbench, its head tilted ever so slightly, as if it was listening. The room settled into silence, save for the faint creak of wood and the whisper of something else almost alive. Sleep didn't come easily. Edward lay sprawled out on his narrow cot, staring up at the ceiling, mind churning like the storm outside. No matter how tight he closed his eyes, his puppet's face still haunted him. Those glossy, unblinking eyes, they seemed to drink in every moment. He couldn't help but wonder, had it really moved? Had the mouth truly twitched? Or was it his mind just playing tricks on him again? It wasn't the first time his creation had gotten under his skin. Last month he swore he heard one of his breathing, soft, rasp, gasp like an asthmatic child. But he chalked it up to fatigue. Too long, too many endless nights. He bolted upright, hearing thundering. Silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Slowly he rose and crept towards the workshop door, pressing his ear against the wood. Nothing but just a storm outside. Edward cursed under his breath, just the wind rattling loose shingles. He hesitantly pushed open the door, lantern light spiraling into the cluttered room. The puppet sat exactly where he had left it, head crooked at the unnatural angle, eyes gleaming in the dim light, but something felt different. He took a step closer with his throat tightening. The puppet's hand, it had moved. It was just an inch, it was barely noticeable, but its slender wooden figures now brushed against the edge of the workbench. Edward sat hard, logic battling against instinct. He must have bumped it earlier, it had to be that. Gritting his teeth, he took the puppet's arm and repositioned it, laying it flat. His hands trembled as he stepped back, refusing to look at the face. Instead, he focused on his tools: chisels, sandpaper, knives, and paint. He needed to work. He needed to forget. As he worked, his mind wandered back to his first puppet, the one that had started it all. A simple marionette with blue painted eyes and a crooked smile. Back then it had been a hobby, a way to fill some lonely hours. But something had changed after that. The puppets became more intricate, more lifelike, more demanding. It was almost as if they needed to be perfect. No imperfections, no flaws, only beauty. You're almost done. The chisel slipped, slicing his palm. Edward cursed, gripping his bleeding hand, his breath coming out in short, ragged gasps. He glanced at the puppet, half expecting it to be grinning at him, but it remained still, silent, and haunting. Badge in his hand, he couldn't shake the sensation he was now being watched. He turned to his puppet, trying to block out the gnawing dread coiling in his stomach, but the whisper came again, softer this time, almost as a caress. Make me real. He spun around, his heart seizing in his chest. Nothing, just the puppet, as lifeless as ever. But he could not ignore it anymore. The voice, the moving hand, the eyes that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Edward slowly backs out of the workshop and shuts the door behind him. He locked the door, trapping the nightmare within. But even as he retreated to his cot, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The whispers were growing louder, and the fear gnawed at him. Like rats beneath the floorboard, he couldn't stop making them. He couldn't stop perfecting them. Because if he stood, and if he stopped, they might take him instead. Make me real. Morning light seeped through the dusty windows, but it brought no comfort. Edward sat at the kitchen table, crafting a chipped mug of bitter coffee, his hand bandaged, throbbing with every heartbeat. He hadn't slept, he couldn't sleep. The whispers still linger in his ears, like threads winding together around his mind. He tried to ground himself, focus on familiar sounds of the village waking up. Market carts rattling down the cobblestone streets. The butcher sharpening his knives. Miss Linton berating her husband for tracking mud into the house again. Ordinary, comforting noises. Nothing like the suffocating silence of his workshop. He hears a sound of weird creaking from inside the workshop. His eyes dart to the door at the end of the hall, the one that leads back to his creations. A sick, twisting feeling in his gut urges him to leave, to shut it and never go back. But he couldn't. Not when the unfinished puppet was lying there. Lying incomplete. Incomplete things drove him mad. Left his skin itching, his thoughts tangled. He had to finish. It needed to be perfect. He gets up, his chair scraping across the floor, and his footstep approached the workshop door. He turns the key, with a trembling hand bracing himself for whatever lay may inside. The door creaks open, revealing the puppet, exactly where he left it. Sprawled on the workbench, motionless, with glassy eyes fixed towards the ceiling. He sounds a sigh of relief. He steps inside, cautiously, and examines the puppet's arm. Still lying flat as he had left it, Edward let out a shaky laugh. How foolish he had been, letting his imagination warp reality. It was just stress. It was just exhaustion. So he continues to craft. His hands move almost on their own, chiseling the jawline again to perfection. Smoothing the curve of every cheek, he glanced up at its face again, and a chill prickled in his skin. The puppet's eyes seemed to be different, deeper, more human. He leaned in closer, squinting, and noticed something that made his blood run cold. A faint line of red trickled from the corner of one eye, like a tear of blood slowly winding down the smooth wooden cheek. His heart pounded so hard, it should have hurt, but he couldn't look away. With trembling fingers, he wiped the tear away, staring at the crimson smear of the thumb. Paint? No, this was too thin. Too warm. He looked back at the puppet for just a moment. He could have sworn he saw its mouth twitch upward, like a grotesque, triumphant grin. No, 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 he says, terrified. The stain wouldn't come off. No matter how hard he scrubbed, it only spread, seeping into the wood, deeper and deeper like an unhealing wound. Panic surged through him. Irrational fear of suffocating terror. He dropped the sandpaper and now stumbled back, gasping for air. There is a soft creak behind him. He spins around, but the room is empty. Just rows of finished puppets lining the shelves, their blank faces frozen in silent judgment. Edward wiped his sweating palms on his apron, forcing himself to breathe. He was losing his grip, losing his mind. Puppets didn't bleed. Puppets didn't move. But the room, it seemed to close in on him. The air was thick and suffocating. Desperate to escape, he snatched his coat and stumbled out the workshop, slamming the door behind him as he fled down the street. He could not shake the feeling that 100 unblinking eyes were watching him go. Edward barely noticed the chill in the air as he trudged through the winding streets. His mind managed, but it was a tangled mess of fear and disbelief. The images of bleeding puppets seared into his memory. He needed answers. He needed someone to tell him he wasn't going mad. He stumbled into a bar, and the barkeep greets him. "Edward, been a while since we've seen you. Thought you'd gone and locked yourself away in the workshop for good." Edward managed a weak smile, brushing the dust from his coat. "Need a break. Thought I'd stop in for a drink." "You look like you've seen a ghost. Those puppets finally haunting you?" He sets a mug of beer down on the bar. Edward's hands froze around the mug. The barkeep laughed, but there was something in his tone, something that made Edward's stomach twist. "Just working too hard, I suppose." While sitting there with the barkeep, he hears some villagers talking in the background. "Did you hear? The old chapel got vandalised again last night. Damn kids knocked over the saint statue. Painted its eyes black and sinful stuff like that. Strange though, last week it was the bakery sign. Someone scrawled faces on it, hollowed eyes. It gave me the chills." Edward's blood now ran cold. Hollowed eyes, like the puppets in his workshop. Like the way it seemed to bleed and grin all at the same time. People say puppets are cursed, you know. Too human, too lifelike. Some of the folks around here think that your puppets are unnatural, Edward. Edward replies to the barkeep, "They're just puppets, wood and cloth, nothing more." But the way his voice trembled beneath his own uncertainties, he drained the mug and pushed it away, muttering his thanks before stepping out into the street. He needed to know what was happening. Maybe it was just paranoia, maybe the villagers' whispers had got into him. He couldn't go back to the workshop though, not yet. Instead, he found his feet carrying him to the church at the edge of the village. The place had always given him uneasy feelings. Old and crumbling gargoyles, staring down like petrified demons. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing against stone. The chapel was empty, but something felt wrong. Like the air itself was thicker, suffocating. As he moved deeper inside, he saw the saint statues tipped over, smeared with black paint and around the eyes, just like they said. "What is happening?" Edward says to himself. He hears a faint scrapping noise coming from the confessional booth. His heart pounds, but the curiosity overpowers his fear. He approaches the booth, hesitant before pushing the curtains aside. Inside sits Father Mathis, head bowed, hands clasped tightly around his rosary. "Father?" "They whispered to me, Edward. The eyes, they see everything. They're watching us. They're watching me." Edward took a cautious step closer, the priest looking up, and Edward recoiled. Black paint stained down the man's fingers, and his eyes were rigid with dark circles as if he hadn't slept in days. "The souls, Edward, your puppets, they're not empty. Something's in them, something cruel." Edward backed away, bile now rising in his throat. Father Mathis let out a low, broken sob, mumbling incoherently as he rocked back and forth. But then, he hears footsteps from behind. "You shouldn't be in here. Father's been unwell. Best let him rest." Edward didn't argue. He slipped up through the chapel, mind reeling. Cursed? Possessed? His rational mind fought against it, but the evidence was mounting. Eerie whispers, bleeding wounds, and now the priest himself unravelling. A storm began to gather in the distance. He made his way back to his workshop, dreading what he might find. When he opened the door, his heart nearly stopped. The puppets were different, rearranged, their heads turned to face the door as if they'd been waiting for him in the centre of the room. The unfinished puppet lay sprawled, its head turned at unnatural angles and its glass eyes fixed on Edward. A single thought went through his mind. They had now moved. Edward slammed the door shut behind him. He pressed his back against the wood, the chest heavily with panicking breaths. The puppets staring at him, glassy eyes reflecting the dim lights like hungry predators in the dark. It's not real. He forced himself to take a step forward. Then, eyes darting from the puppets to puppets, their faces frozen in their eerily lifelike expressions. He could not shake the feeling that they were watching him, tracking his every move. Desperation crept into his thoughts. He needed to prove they hadn't moved. Maybe he'd just been too tired, too paranoid. Didn't notice anything when he left. Yes, that must be it. But as he reached out for his chisel, his hands brushed against something soft and warm. What the? He looked down and his stomach was in knots. A small, bloody hand protruded from a pile of wood shavings. One of the puppet hands. But it wasn't wood. It looked disturbingly real. Pale flesh marred with dry blood. This isn't right. He hears a knock from his door.
Edward, you in there?
Edward froze, pulse pounding in his ears now. He glanced at the puppets. They hadn't moved, but something about their blank, serene expressions almost smug.
Yes, I'm in here.
The door slowly opens now, and a villager walks in. People are talking, Edward. Say you've been wandering the village at night, doing strange things. That's nonsense. I've been working here. I haven't left for days. But Martha says she saw you down by the river last night, dragging something heavy. Said you were covered in dirt and blood. Edward's heart now skipped a beat. He hadn't been by the river. He was sure of it. But his sleep has been restless, fragmented. Had he gone without realizing? She's mistaken. I died. People are worried, Edward. You should rest. Whatever you're doing in here is starting to scare people. The villager now leaves. Edward leans against the wall, sweat beading on his forehead. Was he sleepwalking? Was his mind starting to unravel? He looked down at his hands, splintered, calloused, and sneered with something dark. No, this can't be my blood. He spun around, eyes darting to the centre of the room. The unfinished puppet had shifted, its head now completely facing him, mouth twisted into a faint, unnatural smile. Almost complete. He scrambled to the door, throwing it open and running out into the night, his mind a cacophony of confusion and terror. The villager watched him from their windows, whispering among themselves. He didn't care, he just needed to get away. He ran and reached the riverbank. There, half buried in mud, he saw it. A shape, wrapped in cloth, red stains bleeding through, dread coiled around his spine. As he crouched down and pulled the cloth away, he caught it, his breath in his throat. It was a puppet. A twisted, malformed puppet. Its face, a grotesque mockery of human eyes. Its eyes were shallow and nothingness, but underneath the wood and the fabric there was flesh, rotting and crawling with maggots. What have I done? As he looked back towards the workshop, he saw them. Figures moving slowly through the darkness, shambling towards him. Puppets. No, people. Limbs twisted and heads lolling at unnatural angles, but unmistakably alive. Almost complete. Almost like us. I don't know how much about that captured because Edward's legs refused to move as he shambled across and the figures drew closer. Their distorted limbs dragging through the mud and the leaves. Each one wore the same serene, unsettling smile. A grin carved straight from a nightmare. He couldn't tell where the wood ended and the flesh began. This isn't possible. I didn't make them. I didn't. He took a step back. His feet started to sink into the wet earth. His mind raced, trying to remember. Had he built them in his sleep? Was his mind so fractured that he'd lost track of reality? One of the puppets stopped inches from him, its face twisted, with something between a grin and grimace. Join us, Edward. You belong with us. He stumbles back, hands now trembling, as he stared at the abomination. It reached out with wooden fingers, splintered and bleeding where flesh would meet wood, and Edward could see something moving beneath its cracked surface, like veins pulsing with unnatural life. Panic consumed him. He bolted back to his workshop, slamming the door behind him. He pressed his hands against the temples, trying to drown out the whispers seeping through the cracks. Leave me alone! You're not real! But then a knock appears at his door. Slowly he approaches the door, breathing and shaky. He had to know. He had to see if they were still out there. His hand now hovered over the handle, and he swung it open. But the yard was empty. The moonlight bathing the ground in a cold light. No twisted puppets, no shambling corpses, just the empty quiet of the night. Confusion gnawed at him, and he backed away, bumping into his workbench. But then he saw it. The unfinished puppet, the one he'd been working on for weeks. It was now sat upright, propped against the wall, head cocked at a straight angle. Its face now looked different, more detailed, more human. And its eyes, they gleamed with something, more than just varnish. "You're almost done, Edward. I'll break you apart. I'll destroy every last one of you." He charged at the puppet, swinging his knife with all his strength, but before the puppet struck with the blade, the puppet's hand shot up, grabbing his wrist. With an unnaturally iron grip, Edward froze, eyes wide. Puppet leans closer, whispers in his ear. "Almost complete. The strings are waiting." He looks down at his own arm. Wood grain patterns crawling up his skin like a spiraling infection. Fingers stiffening into rigid jointed segments. He screamed, clawing at his skin as splinters pierced through his flesh from inside out. No, please, I'm not one of you." Desperate, he staggered towards the mirror on the wall, only to see his face changing, eyes becoming glassy and fixed, mouth frozen in that grotesque smile. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but his face wouldn't move, wouldn't shift from that eerie puppet-like expression. As his legs gave out, they collapsed onto the floor, limbs bending at unnatural angles. Through his own blurred vision, he saw the other puppets standing around him, some human, some wooden, but all sharing that same look of twisted satisfaction. Almost complete. The puppet maker has become the puppet. Treat this story as a reminder. The more you try to control your world, the more likely it is to control you. If this tale has left you unnerved, share it, let someone else peek behind the curtain, and now don't forget, you can experience the visual side of the nightmares with our new horror comics on Webtoons and Global Comics, and support the creation of even darker stories on Patreon. Everything's waiting through the links in the description. Till next time, keep an eye on that glitch, because sometimes the glitch is truth.